What's wrong with this scene heading? Interior, dusty old house, April, sunrise. Let's find out. How's it? This is Chop, Screenplay Prep, and scene headings, one of the most important aspects of the formatting of a screenplay, and one that often goes so wrong. And what I mean by wrong is the inconsistency, inaccuracy, which effectively just leads to confusion on set. So what is a scene heading? It is the line of information that tells you where we are and when we are, essentially. It's very simple, and for the reader at the script stage, it presents where the location is, whether it's inside or outside, and time of day. At a very basic level, day or night. For the film crew, it adds a lot more information. So for pre-production, they work out where the sets are going to need to be, how much traveling is going to be going on. Therefore, you can budget a movie on the basis of the script's scene headings. So what software can do is export a scene heading only report that gives just line by line all the scenes in your screenplay. And from that, the production or producers, even before greenlighting a movie, can ascertain the scope of the film, how many countries might need to be visited, whether it's many countries or just one, how much traveling within that. Is everything indoors? Is it outdoors? And what the mix is. Is it going to be day shoots, night shoots? So you can get a very good grasp of the cost of a film and the possible hurdles therein. Now, one main thing to note here is a confusion within the industry, not just with the amateurs, but also the professionals. Scene headings are not slug lines and vice versa. Slug lines often, even in instructional books, get touted as the same as scene headings. They're not. Slug lines are all caps, denoting something of attention. We won't get into the specifics of slug lines here because I don't want to confuse, but essentially if you're calling attention to something and you're doing it in uppercase on a line of its own, it might look like a shot, essentially. He grabs the gun. Something like that is a slug line. So let's get back to scene headings, and they're broken up into the three components. So number one, interior or exterior. It's simply written INT dot or ext dot. Now those are short form for interior or exterior. So there's always a period, a dot, following INT or ext. So is the place where this is going to be happening inside or outside? So how can you best tell if you're inside or outside? You might laugh, but a perfect example is a football game, American football game, let's say. You're at a stadium. Are you inside or are you outside? Some people say if the camera looks up, does it see the sky or does it see the interior of a roof? And that determines your interior or exterior, inside, outside status. I like to go further and say really the camera represents a point of view. And of course, the cinematographer or director could choose to place the camera wherever they like to achieve that point of view. So I think what is more accurate is to say from the point of view, which isn't necessarily the group of actors in front of the camera, but the person potentially listening in or observing. If that position looks up and sees the sky, then it's exterior. If they see the inside of a roof because they're in a car or they're in a house or a stadium with a roof, then you're inside. Now, occasionally you will see interior/exterior. This is used sparingly and covers for when the camera is most likely on a dolly, which means on wheels, or it's a Steadicam operator, and there's a smooth running from one space into another. So you might be following a character as they walk out of the house to the front garden, or vice versa. Could be stepping into a bus, for example. That's where you're covering one location to the other and the camera movement doesn't break. The second part of the scene heading is the location. At this point, let's keep it simple and say house. That's in uppercase with no separator in terms of commas or dashes beforehand. So you go from interior dot space house. And now we come to the third component of the scene heading, which is separated by that dash, and it is day or night. Uppercase, simple as that, finished. So in simple terms, that covers the scene heading. However, the confusions come in when people start writing descriptive things in the scene heading for the location. The Super Bowl is not a location. The Green Bay Stadium would be the location, and it happens to be that the Super Bowl might be being played there. Location must purely be the physical place, the place that the film crew jump in their trucks and drive to. This is where it might get tricky. You often see a location separated by dashes where you have something like New York, office building, kitchen, then day. So we have three mentions there where we're having to declare something within something. This is quite often the case where you need to separate one person's house or office from another person. So you might have a movie where you jump between Bob's house and Sally's house, in which case in the scene heading, you can say Bob's house, space, dash, space, day. And then subsequently, you might have Sally's house. But then within that, you start your scene in Sally's house, but then she goes up to the bedroom. So you might have something like Sally's house, space, dash, space, bedroom. Now, here's the key, because some people get things muddled up, and it's not that there is no rule book. But from my perspective, for clarity, when you're directing someone to a location, you always start big and drill down and go small. So if you're telling your friend to go to your favorite pizza restaurant, you would say, yeah, it's the one in New York, it's in Manhattan, it's on 5th Street. You drill down. You don't start by saying the street and then ending up in New York. So I'm going to illustrate this in what might seem an overdone way, but I think this drives the point home. So if you look at planet Earth, you're telling someone, I live in North America. I live in the state of California. Los Angeles, I'm in this neighborhood, and here's my house. So you're drilling down from big to small. So to put that in a nice scene heading context, you would put something like exterior, Los Angeles, Bob's house, day. If your screenplay entirely takes place in Los Angeles, you may not need to declare Los Angeles. You'd do that if you're jumping between, let's say, New York and Los Angeles, and you'd enter that into your scene heading. Whatever you do, try and be simple as possible. You don't want long scene headings. You certainly don't want them running over one line. Now, something I must add here, because different people do different things. The separators within scene headings are often seen as dashes or periods. Never use commas. So when you have Bob's house and you want to then declare kitchen, I suggest you use dashes. Now, you wouldn't be penalized for using periods, but the reason I don't use periods is simply because with your interior and exterior being that short form, you're putting a period after the int or ext. And I just think it's neater to not mix the use of periods. The period is denoting shorthand for interior. So leave the periods for that. Flip to dashes because they kind of lead the eye on to the next thing. So it's kind of signposting one spot. Now we're in the room within and whatnot. There is in fact a fourth component to scene headings. It's just not always used every time. So you may see flashback, for example. Well, there are many ways of formatting a flashback, but one of the preferred ways is to put flashback, obviously in uppercase, at the very end of your scene heading, and I suggest using the square brackets just to separate that out. But after your day or night, you'd have a space, and then you would declare flashback. In place of day or night. Sometimes you'll see continuous or same. Again, those things use sparingly. Continuous is a long word. Obviously, same is shorter. But if it's day, there's no harm in just repeating day rather than trying to be clever and write continuous. But essentially, the continuous would mean that if someone's walking into the house and you've got that exterior shot, and then the next scene immediately picks up, you could say on the second scene heading, instead of day or night, you have the continuous just to keep things flowing. But it's often one of those things people worry about too much and is overused, and you keep jumping between day, night, continuous, same, and it just gets messy. If you can stick to day or night as much as possible, all the better and simpler. Another item you'll see in scene headings is to denote that you're in a moving vehicle. So here is how you would do that. If the car's a convertible, then you could say exterior, but essentially for most vehicles, truck, bus, whatever, it's interior, then car or bus, dash, traveling, or moving, whichever you prefer, doesn't really matter, and then another dash, day or night. So now let's look at the third and important part of the scene heading, day or night, because this is something that's up for lots of discussion and people might argue about this all the time. And of course, you'll look at the internet and see well-known writers producing screenplays that you can download, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. You have to be aware that just because it's been made into a movie doesn't mean it's the right way for a new screenwriter who's trying to get himself known to be copying what the supposed pros are doing. You've got to also realize that independent filmmakers can do what the hell they like because they write their movie and then film their own movie. Keeping to a convention that makes it easier for the Hollywood reader to understand what you're on about, we like to suggest just to keep to day or night. So what we're often seeing are things like dusk, dawn, sunrise, sunset. It's much better to say day or night in your scene heading, and then in the action description in the first line of that below, state that a beautiful sunrise, blah, 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 or the sun sets as blah, blah, blah. So what do you do for day or night in terms of then leading on to a sunrise or a sunset? Well, I believe there is a logic to it. Day leads to night, and at the end of the day, you have a sunset. So I believe if you are talking about a sunset, you write day at the end of your scene heading, and then in your action description, you just talk about the colors. I mean, it depends what's really relevant for your story. Is it important that the director captures the sunset? Does the camera need to see orange colors trickling across the water? Well, if so, put that in your action description. So daytime in your scene heading, and describe the sunset in the action description. Correspondingly, if it's a sunrise, then put night, and then in your action description, talk about the chirping birds in the early morning and the mist rising, whatever it might be, and that generally will work. The important thing is, throughout your screenplay, make it consistent. Now, you may well have heard of the term master scene heading and secondary scene heading. So here's how you can make life a little easier for yourself and for the reader. Essentially, you want to make everything easy for the reader and the film crew. Don't cut corners to make your life easy. It's all about the people that need to use your script and make something of it. So, a master scene heading is essentially what we've been talking about. It describes whether you're inside or outside, the location, and then the day or night. Now, if you're moving within a house, rather than repeating the lengthy master scene heading, if you can have a number of scenes in a sequence of characters running between the bedroom and the kitchen and the downstairs living room, what you can use is a secondary scene heading. Now this is in uppercase, and you can omit the interior or exterior because you've already established that you're inside Bob's house. So Bob then moves to the living room. So what you can do, now if you're using something like Final Draft, I typically prefer to format this secondary scene heading as shot, and that ensures it's in uppercase, and then you would put living room. Now, because the action's continuing, it's still whatever was in the master scene heading before, let's say it's day, so you don't need to repeat that. So the secondary scene heading just declares living room. And then you'd have your action description below, and then Bob runs upstairs to the bedroom. Now, you don't need to show him running up the stairs and show that journey. You just jump from living room to bedroom. So you then have another secondary heading declaring bedroom, all caps, and then follow the action description below. This is also a very useful technique when you're trying to quicken the pace of your read, because you've got action going on in the story. So a car chase sequence, for example, the car obviously moves between these locations, and maybe you're jumping between the cops who are chasing and the guy in his red car up front. So you can jump between cop car, red car, cop car, red car as the secondary scene headings, and then describing what you're seeing between. Let's look at an example of a location in a house and how it might work jumping between the rooms. So here we have a house in front of us. The front door leads to a hallway with a stairway, and on the bottom left you have a living room, bottom right you have a kitchen, and up the stairs you have an upstairs hallway leading to the bathroom on the left, and top right you have a bedroom. This is how your scene heading would be written. The very first instance would be the master scene heading. We would have interior, Bob's house, living room, day. Now, if you were to jump to a different location and cut back to Bob's house, and he's now in the bedroom and he's asleep, this is how it would look. Interior, Bob's house, bedroom, night. But if he was to hear a sound, wake up, and then walk downstairs to the living room, you would simply then have a secondary scene heading of living room and resume the action of what Bob's doing in the living room. If he was to go outside the front door, you would then need a new master scene heading because he's going from one location to another. So although the vicinity is Bob's land, you're going from interior of the house to exterior of the house. So you need to set up a new master scene heading. So that would be now exterior, Bob's house, night. And the action description would show him poking around his yard. At the beginning of this video, I gave you an example of a scene heading which was very much wrong. Interior, dusty old house, April, sunrise. The correct formatting of the scene would be interior, house, night. In the ensuing action description, you would describe that it's a dusty old house and that the sun is beginning to rise and the light streams through the windows. That's how you would do that. I hope that was all very useful to you in simplifying how scene headings should be formatted. We do see a lot of errors, so I do hope that this was worthwhile in making things a little clearer for you. I'm very much aware that there's a lot of conflicting information out there. Ultimately, anything that is concise, clear, and efficient is what's important, and I believe I've covered that in this video for you. Any doubts with your screenplay, then you can simply submit your script for a formatting check, and these kind of errors will be fixed for you, or suggestions made where things are a little ambiguous. I hope that was very useful to you and put your mind at rest, and I shall see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. If you found that video useful, please consider liking and subscribing. That will tell YouTube that I'm worth watching and ensures I can produce more educational content into the future.